Yo, how y'all doing? Hey, what a fucked up couple of days, man. Yeah, well, I'd say I hope y'all are doing well, but if, y'all are VTuber fans, especially Hololive fans, you're, probably not. It's been a couple of days, man, and, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely caused everyone to be a bit self-reflective, which I think there's value in, but at the same time, I'm sure it's painful for a lot of people as this signifies an end of an era, but I don't know. As best I can say is y'all will get through this, okay? I'm a Hololive fan as well, so y'all will get through it. But yeah, I've been busy the past couple of days. Hope you all had a nice Thanksgiving. For those who celebrate, I mean, it's always nice to have an excuse to have some good food and, I don't know, show some self-reflection. I always think self-reflection is a very good skill or a good trait to have. Or it's good to practice, I should say. I don't know. I'm probably just rambling. Which I tend to do. I tend to do that. But yes, so I've been busy, but I have had a bit of time today, so I figured fit in like one stream, or short stream, and we're just gonna keep it chill. I'm just gonna do some reading. If y'all remember in October, I was reading some spooky stories, but I still want to do more reading, so I selected three short stories to read tonight. These are some more classic stories, so hopefully these can help you all fall asleep. If you are needing to go to sleep, that is, but yeah, I'm rambling again. I'm fucking rambling again. I think that's enough bullshitting. Might as well just get into this. I have my water with me. Wait. Yeah, that'll be decent. And I also have a pie with me. I had some leftover sweet potato pie that I bought the other day, so I'm eating that now. So yeah, if you see me take a break every now and then, it is to put more of this pie in my mouth. It's not bad, honestly. I mean, would have liked it if I could have made it myself, but for what it is, it ain't bad. Probably should put these marshmallows in there a little bit longer. All good. Right, been enough bullshitted. Let's get into it then. So the first story, which I have written here, is called "The Lottery." It is a story by Shirley Jackson that was published in 1948. So it's quite the number. It's quite a bit of an older one, over 70 years old at this point. Actually, it's like 75 or 76 technically, but now you know what I mean. But age does not determine quality. So let's get into it. Not very long, but this is my first time reading it as well, so we'll see the quality of it. The Lottery. The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny, with the fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely, and the grass was richly green. The people of the village began to gather in the square, between the post office and the bank. Sorry. Around 10 o'clock, in some towns, there were so many people that the lottery took 2 days and had to be started on June 26th. But in this village, where there were only about 300 people, the whole lottery took only about 2 hours, so it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow the villagers to get home for noon dinner. Actually, should I hold my microphone a little bit closer? Let's try that. It ain't that far from me, but I can hold it closer. Hello, yo. Okay, hopefully this fits a more ASMR vibe. If you would prefer I move the microphone further away, I can definitely do that as well. Actually, let me do one test. Sorry, one test. 1 second. Testing, testing. Okay, yeah, that works. Alright then, so it's coming a bit crisper then. Now, where was I? Where was I? The children assembled first, of course. School was recently over for the summer, and the feeling of liberty set uneasily on most of them. They tended to gather together quietly for a while before they broke into a boisterous play, and their talk was still of the classroom, and the teacher, of books and reprimands. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his examples, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. Bobby and Harry Jones and Dickie Delacroix, the villagers pronounced his name Delacroix, eventually made a great pile of stones in one corner of the square and guarded it against the rage of the other boys. The girls stood aside, talking amongst themselves, looking over their shoulders at the boys, and the very small children rolled in the dust or clung to the hands of the older brothers and sisters. Soon the men began to gather, surveying their own children, speaking of planting and rain, tractors and taxes. They stood together, away from the pile of stones in the corner, and their jokes were quiet and they smiled rather than laughed. The women, wearing faded horse dresses and sweaters, came shortly after their menfolk. They greeted one another and exchanged bits of gossip as they went to join their husbands. Soon, the women standing by their husbands began to call to their children, and the children came reluctantly, having to be called 4 or 5 times. Bobby Martin ducked under his mother's grasping hand and ran, laughing, back to the pile of stones. His father spoke up sharply, and Bobby came quickly and took his place between his father and his oldest brother. 1 second, sorry, I need to wipe my phone. That's better. The lottery was conducted, as were the square dances, the teen club, the Halloween program, by Mr. Summers, who had time and energy to devote to civic activities. He was a round-faced, jovial man, and he ran the coal business, and the people were sorry for him because he had no children and his wife was a scold. When he arrived in the square, carrying the black wooden box, there was a murmur of conversation among the villagers, and he waved his hand and called, "Little late today, folks." The postmaster, Mr. Graves, followed him, carrying a 3-legged stool, and the stool was put in the center of the square, and Mr. Summers set the black box down on it. The villagers kept their distance, leaving a space between them and the stool, and when Mr. Summers said, "Some of you fellows want to give me a hand?" there was a hesitation before 2 men, Mr. Martin and his older son, Baxter, came forward to hold the box steady on the stool while Mr. Summers stirred up the papers inside it. The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box now rested on the stool had been put into use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in town, was born. Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. There was a story that the present box had been made with some pieces of the box that had preceded it, the one that had been constructed when the first people settled down to make a village here. Every year after the lottery, Mr. Summers began talking again about a new box, but every year the subject was allowed to fade off without anything being done. The black box grew shabbier each year. By now it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along one side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or stained. Mr. Martin and his oldest son, Baxter, held the black box securely on the stool until Mr. Summers had stirred the papers thoroughly with his hand. Because so much of the ritual had been forgotten or discarded, Mr. Summers had been successful in having slipped up pieces of paper substituted for chips of wood that had been used for generations. Chips of wood, Mr. Summers had argued, had been all very well when the village was tiny, but now the population was more than 300, and likely to keep on growing. It was necessary to use something that would fit more easily into the black box. The night before the lottery, Mr. Summers and Mr. Graves made up the slips of paper and put them into the box, and it was then taken to the safe of Mr. Summers' coal company and locked up until Mr. Summers was ready to take it to the square next morning. The rest of the year, the box was put away, sometimes one place, sometimes another. It had spent 1 year in Mr. Graves' barn and another underfoot in the post office, and sometimes it was sat on the shelf in the Martin grocery and left there. There was a great deal of fussing to be done before Mr. Summers declared the lottery open. There were the lists to make up of heads and family, heads of households in each family, members of each household in each family. There was the proper swearing in of Mr. Summers by the postmaster as the official of the lottery. At one time, some people remembered, there had been a recital of sort, performed by the official of the lottery, a perfunctory tuneless chant that had been rattled off duly each year. Some people believed that the official of the lottery used to stand just so when he sang or said it. just so when he said or sang it, others believed that he was supposed to walk among the people. But years and years ago, this part of the ritual had been allowed to lapse. There had been also a ritual salute, which the official of the lottery had to use in addressing each person who came up to draw from the box, but this had also changed with time, until now it was felt necessary only for the official to speak to each person approaching. Mr. Summers was very good at all this. In his clean white shirt and blue jeans, with one hand resting carelessly on the black box, he seemed very proper and important as he talked intermediately to Mr. Graves and the Martins. Just as Mr. Summers finally left off talking and turned to the assembled villagers, Mrs. Hutchinson came hurriedly along the path to the square, her sweater thrown over her shoulders and slid into place in the back of the crowd. "Clean forgot what day it was," she said to Mrs. Delacroix, who stood next to her, and they both laughed softly. "Thought my old man was out back stacking wood," Mrs. Hutchinson went on, "and then I looked out in the window and the kids were gone, and then I remembered it was the 27th and came a-running." She dried her hands on her apron, and Mrs. Delacroix said, "You're in time, though. They're still taking it away up there." Mrs. Hutchinson craned her neck to see through the crowd and found her husband and children standing near the front. She tapped Mrs. Delacroix on the arm as a farewell, and began to make her way through the crowd. The people separated good-humoredly to let her through. 2 or 3 people said, in voices just loud enough to be heard across the crowd, "Here comes your Mrs. Hutchinson," and "Bill, she made it after all." Mrs. Hutchinson reached her husband, and Mr. Summers, who had been waiting, said cheerfully, "Thought we were going to have to get on without you, Tessie." Mrs. Hutchinson said, grinning, "Wouldn't have me leave me dishes in me sink now, would you, Joe?" And soft laughter ran through the crowd as the people stirred back into position after Mrs. Hutchinson's arrival. "Well now," Mr. Summers said soberly, "guess we better get started and get this over with, so we can go back to work. Anybody ain't here?" "Dunbar," several people said. "Dunbar, Dunbar." Mr. Summers consulted his list. "Clyde Dunbar," he said. "That's right. He broke his leg, hasn't he? Who's drawing for him?" "Me, I guess," a woman said, and Mr. Summers turned to look at her. "Wife draws for her husband," Mr. Summers says. "Don't you have a grown boy to do it for you, Janie?" Although Mr. Summers and everyone else in the village knew the answer perfectly well, it was the business of the official of the lottery to ask such questions formally. Mr. Summers waited for with an expression of polite interest while Mrs. Dunbar answered. "Horace is not but 16 yet," Mrs. Dunbar said regretfully. "Guess I gotta fill in for the old man this year." "Right," Mr. Summers said. He made a note on the list he was holding, then he asked, "Watson boy, drawing this year?" A tall boy in the crowd raised his hand. "Here," he said. "I'm drawing for my mother and me." He blinked his eyes nervously and ducked his head as several voices in the crowd said things like, "Good fellow, Jack," and "Glad to see your mother's got a man to do it." "Well," Mr. Summers said, "guess that's everyone. Old man Warner make it?" "Here," a voice said, and Mr. Summers nodded. A sudden hush fell on the crowd as Mr. Summers cleared his throat and looked at the list. "All ready?" he called. "Now, I'll read the names, heads of family first, and the men come up and take a paper out of the box. Keep the paper folded in your hand without looking at it until everyone has had a turn. Everything clear?" The people had done it so many times that they only half listened to the directions. Most of them were quiet, wetting their lips, not looking around. Then Mr. Summers raised one hand high and said, "Adams." A man disengaged himself from the crowd and came forward. "Hi, Steve," Mr. Summers said, and Mr. Adams said, "Hi, Joe." They grinned at one another humorously or nervously. Then Mr. Adams reached into the black box and took out a folded paper. He held it firmly by one corner as he turned and hastily went back to his place in the crowd, where he stood a little apart from his family, not looking down at his hand. "Allen," Mr. Summers said. "Anderson. Bentham." "Seems like there's no time at all between lotteries anymore," Mrs. Delacroix said to Mrs. Graves in the back row. "Seems we got through with the last one only last week." "Time sure goes by fast," Mrs. Graves said. "Clark." Delacroix. There goes my old man, Mrs. Delacroix said. She held her breath while her husband went forward. Dunbar, Mr. Summers said, and Mrs. Dunbar steadily went on to the box, while one of the women said, Go on, Janey, and another said, There she goes. Where next? Mrs. Graves said, while she watched while Mr. Graves came around from the side of the box, greeted Mr. Summers gravely, and selected a slip of paper from the box. By now, all through the crowd there were men holding the small folded papers in their large hands, turning them over and over nervously. Mrs. Dunbar and her two sons stood together, Mrs. Dunbar holding a slip of paper. Hardbirth. Hutchinson. Get up there, Bill, Mrs. Hutchinson said, and the people near her laughed. Jones. They do say, Mr. Adams said to Old Man Warner, who stood next to him, that over in the North Village they're talking of giving up the lottery. Old Man Warner snorted. Pack of crazy fools, he said, listening to the young folks. Nothing's good enough for them. Next thing you know, they'll be wanting to go back to living in caves. Nobody work anymore. Live that way for a while. Used to be a saying about lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. First thing you know, we'll all be eating stewed chickweed and acorns. There's always been a lottery, he added pointedly. Bad enough to see young Joe Summers up there joking with everyone. Some places have already quit lotteries, Mrs. Adams added. Nothing but trouble in that, Old Man Warner said stoutly. Pack of young fools. Martin, and Bobby Martin watched his father go forward. Overdyke. Percy. I'd wish they'd hurry, Mrs. Dunbar said to her oldest son. I wish they'd hurry. They're almost through, her son said. You get ready to run to tell Dad, Mrs. Dunbar said. Mr. Summers called his own name and then stepped forward precisely and selected a slip from the box. Then he called, Warner. 77th year I've been in the lottery, Old Man Warner said as he went through the crowd. 77th time. Watson. The tall boy came awkwardly through the crowd. Somebody said, Don't be nervous, Jack. And Mr. Summers said, Take your time, son. Zanini. After that, there was a long pause, a breathless pause, until Mr. Summers, holding his slip of paper in the air, said, All right, fellows. For a minute, no one moved, and then all the slips of paper were opened. Suddenly, all the women began to speak at once, saying, Who is it? Who's got it? Is it the Dunbars? Is it the Watsons? Then the voices began to say, It's Hutchinson. It's Bill. Bill Hutchinson's got it. Go tell your father, Mrs. Dunbar said to her oldest son. People began to look around to see the Hutchinsons. Bill Hutchinson was standing quiet, staring down at the paper in his hand. Suddenly, Tessie Hutchinson shouted to Mr. Summers. You didn't give him enough time to take any paper he wanted. I saw you. It wasn't fair. Be a good sport, Tessie, Mrs. Delroy called, and Mr. Graves said, All of us took the same chance. Shut up, Tessie, Bill Hutchinson said. Well, everyone, Mr. Summers says, that was done pretty fast, and now we've got to be hurrying a little more to get it done in time. He consulted his next list. Bill, he said, you draw for the Hutchinson family. Got any other households in the Hutchinsons? There's Dawn and Ava, Mrs. Hutchinson yelled. Make them take their chance. Daughters draw with their husbands' families, Tessie, Mr. Summers says gently. You know that as well as anyone else. It wasn't fair, Tessie said. I guess not, Joe, Bill Hutchinson said regretfully. My daughter draws with her husband's family. That's only fair. And I've got no other family except the kids. Then, as far as drawing for families is concerned, it's you, Mr. Summers said in explanation. And as far as drawing for households is concerned, that's you too, right? Right, Bill Hutchinson said. How many kids, Bill? Mr. Summers asked formally. 3, Bill Hutchinson said. There's Bill Jr., and Nancy, and little Dave, and Tessie, and me. All right then, Mr. Summers said. Harry, You got their ticket all back? Mr. Graves nodded and held up the slips of paper. Put them in the box then, Mr. Summers directed. Take Bill's and put it in. I think we ought to start over, Mrs. Hutchinson said as quietly as she could. I tell you, it wasn't fair. You didn't give him enough time to choose. Everybody saw that. Mr. Graves had selected the 5 slips and put them in the box, and he dropped all the papers, but those onto the ground, where the breeze caught them and lifted them off. Listen, everybody, Mrs. Hutchinson was saying to the people around her. Ready, Bill? Mr. Summers asked, and Bill Hutchinson, with one quick glance around at his wife and children, nodded. Remember, Mr. Summers said, take the slips and keep them folded until each person has taken one. Hetty, you help little Dave. Mr. Graves took the hand of the little boy who came willingly with him up to the box. Take a paper out of the box, Davy, Mr. Summers said. Davy put his hand into the box and laughed. Take just one paper, Mr. Summers said. Hetty, you hold it for him. Mr. Graves took the child's hand and removed the folded paper from the tight fist and held it while little Davy stood next to him and looked up at him wonderingly. Nancy next, Mr. Summers said. Nancy was 12, and her school friends breathed heavily as she went forward, switching her skirt and took a slip daintily from the box. Bill Jr., Mr. Summers said, and Billy, his face red and his feet overlarge, nearly knocked the box over as he got the paper out. Tessie, Mr. Summers said. She hesitated for a moment, looking around defiantly, and then set her lips and went up to the box. She snatched the paper out and held it behind her. Bill, Mr. Summers said, and Bill Hutchinson reached into the box and felt around, bringing his hand out at last with the slip of paper in it. The crowd was quiet. A girl whispered, I hope it's not Nancy, and the sounds of the whisper reached to the edges of the crowd. It's not the way it used to be, Old Man Warner said clearly. People ain't the way they used to be. All right, Mr. Summers said. Open the papers. Hurry, you open little Dave's. Mr. Graves opened the slip of paper, and there was a gentle sigh through the crowd as he held it up, and everyone could see it was blank. Nancy and Bill Jr. opened theirs at the same time, and both beamed and laughed, turning around to the crowd and holding their slips of paper above their heads. Tessie, Mr. Summers said. There was a pause, and then Mr. Summers looked at Bill Hutchinson's, and Bill unfolded his paper and showed it. It was blank. It's Tessie, Mr. Summers said, and his voice was hushed. Show us her paper, Bill. Bill Hutchinson went over to his wife and forced the slip of paper out of her hand. It had a black spot on it. The black spot Mr. Summers had made the night before with the heavy pencil in the coal company office. Bill Hutchinson held it up, and there was a stir in the crowd. All right, folks, Mr. Summers said. Let's finish quickly. Although the villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, they still remembered to use stones. The pile of stones the boys had made earlier was ready. There were stones on the ground with the blowing scraps of paper that had come out of the box. Mrs. Delaroy selected a stone so large she had to pick it up with both hands and turned it to Mrs. Dunbar. Come on, she said. Hurry up. Mrs. Dunbar had small stones in both hands, and she said, grasping for breath, I can't run at all. You'll have to go ahead, and I'll catch up with you. The children had stones already, and somebody gave little Davy Hutchinson a few pebbles. Tessie Hutchinson was now in the center of a cleared space by now. She held her hands out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. It ain't fair, she said. A stone hit her on the side of the head. Old Man Warner was saying, come on, everyone. Steve Adams was in the front of the crowd of villagers, had Mrs. Graves beside him. It isn't fair. It isn't right, Mrs. Hutchinson screamed, and then they were upon her. The end. Quite the interesting story there. That was my first time reading it, but it still holds up pretty well for being, 75 years old? Or 76 years old? What did I say earlier? One of those two. Yeah, getting close to 80. but still, it held up pretty well. Did a good job of conveying the dread of, of misfortune of coming in. Definitely added to the mystique of why were they doing such actions, but such questions are best left unanswered, I'm sure. Right, that was our first story for the night. Let me set up the second one. Give me 1 second, please. There we go. Apologies, need to format this a little bit better. There we go, that's better. Put that there. That'll do, that'll do. Let me just slightly adjust myself over here. There we go. Right, where's my water? Let me take a bit of a sip. Also gonna increase my volume slightly, so apologies. That's better. That's better, that's better. Also gonna have a little bit more pie, because still a bit hungry myself. There we go. Sorry about that, I had to swallow. Oh, blasted. Let me get a little more water here. There we go. That's better. That's better. What happens if I put my mic like this? Is this alright for you? Is this not too loud? I can always alter it if I need to. Alright then, how does this sound? Hopefully it's, alright, as it were. If it's too loud, I can always alter it. Actually, let me turn it down slightly. There we go, that should work better. Again, if it's too loud or if I need to alter anything, please let me know. I am pretty dog shit at audio, I must say. Right then, we can get into our next story. Now this one is The Last Question by Isaac Asimov. So this is a science fiction story, which is, in my wheelhouse, as science fiction is probably one of my favorite genres. I've actually been listening to the audiobook for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, as it's been a long ass time since I listened to that, or read it, so it's nice to go through it again. It's definitely well received for a reason. But yes, here we go. This one's not very long, but I've heard it's quite poignant. So yes, let's get into it. The last question. The last question was asked for the first time, half in jest, on May 21st, 2061, at a time when humanity first stepped into the light. The question came about as a result of a $5 bet over highballs, and it happened this way. Alexander Edel and Bertram Lipov were two of the faithful attendants of Motivac. As well as any human beings could, they knew what lay behind the cold, clicking, flashing face. Miles and miles of face of that giant computer. They had at least a vague notion of the general plan of relays and circuits that had long since grown past the point where any single human could possibly have a firm grasp of the whole. Motivac was self-adjusting and self-correcting. It had to be, for nothing humans For nothing human could adjust and correct it quickly enough or even adequately enough. So Adele and Lupov attended the monstrous giant only lightly and superficially. Yet, as well as any man could, they fed it data, adjusted questions to its needs, and translated the answers so that it were issued. Certainly they, and all others like them, were fully entitled to share in the glory that was Multivacs. For decades, Multivac had helped design the ships and plot the trajectories that enabled man to reach the moon, Mars, and Venus, but past that, Earth's poor resources could not support the ships. Too much energy was needed for the long trips. Earth exploited its coal and uranium with increasing efficiency, but there was only so much of both. But slowly, Multivac learned enough to answer deeper questions both fundamentally, and on May 14th, 2061, what had been theory became fact. The energy of the sun was stored, converted, and utilized directly on a planet-wide scale. All Earth turned off its burning coal, its fissioning uranium, and flipped the switch that connected all of it to a small station, 1 mile in diameter, circling the Earth at half the distance of the moon. All Earth ran by invisible beams of sun power. 7 days had not sufficed to dim the glory of it, and Adele and Lupov finally managed to escape from the public functions and to meet in quiet where no one would think of looking for them. In the deserted underground chambers, where portions of the mighty buried body of Multivac showed, unattended, idling, sorting data with contented clicking. Multivac too had earned its vacation, and the boys appreciated that. They had no intention, originally, of disturbing it. Sorry, just give me 1 second here, my eyes are starting to glaze over. There we go, that's better. They had brought a bottle with them, and their only concern at the moment was to relax in the company of each other and the bottle. It's amazing when you think of it, said Adele. His broad face had lines of weariness in it, and he stirred his drink slowly with a glass rod, watching the cubes of ice slur clumsily about. All the energy we can possibly ever use for free. Enough energy, if we wanted to draw on it, to melt all Earth into a big drop of impure liquid iron, and still never miss the energy so used. All the energy we could use, forever and forever and forever. Lupov cocked his head sideways. He had a trick of doing that when he wanted to be contrary, and he wanted to be contrary now, partly because he had to carry the ice and glassware. Not forever, he said. Oh hell, just about forever, till the sun runs down, Bert. That's not forever. Alright then, billions and billions of years. 10 billion, maybe. Are you satisfied? Lupov put his fingers through his thinning hair as though to reassure himself that some was still left and sipped gently on his drink. 10 billion years isn't forever. Well, it will last our time, won't it? So would coal and uranium. Alright, but now we can hook up each individual spaceship to the solar station and it can go to Pluto and back 1,000,000 times without ever worrying about fuel. You can't do that on coal and uranium. Ask Multivac if you don't believe me. I don't have to ask Multivac. I know that. Then stop running down what Multivac's done for us, said Adele, blazing up. It did it right. Who says it didn't? What I say is that a sun won't last forever. That's all I'm saying. We're safe for 10 billion years. But then what? Lupov pointed at a slightly shaky finger at the other. And don't say we'll switch to another sun. There was silence for a while. Adele put his glass to his lips only occasionally, and Lupov's eyes slowly closed. They rested. Then Lupov's eyes snapped open. You're thinking we'll switch over to another sun when ours is done, aren't you? I'm not thinking. Sure you are. You're weak on logic. That's the trouble with you. You're like the guy in the story who was caught under a sudden shower and who ran to a grove of trees and got under one. He wasn't worried, you see. Because he figured when one tree got wet enough, he would just go under another one. I get it, said Adele. Don't shout. When the sun is done, other stars will be gone too. Damn right they will, muttered Lupov. It all had a beginning in the original cosmic explosion, whatever that was, and it'll have to end with all the stars run down. Some will run down faster than others. Hell, the giants won't last 100 million years. The sun will last 10 billion years, and maybe the dwarfs will last 200 billion for all the good they are. But just give us 1 trillion years and everything will be dark. Entropy has to increase to maximum. That's all. I know all about entropy, said Adele, standing on his dignity. Nah, the hell you do. I know as much as you do. Then you know everything's got to run down someday. All right. Who says they won't? You did, you poor sap. You said we had all the energy we needed. Forever. You said forever. It was Adele's turn to be contrary. Well, maybe we can build things up again someday, he said. Never. Why not? Someday. Never. Ask Multivac. You ask Multivac. I dare you. $5 says it can't be done. Adele was just drunk enough to try, just sober enough to be able to phrase the necessary symbols and operations into a question which, in words, might have corresponded to this. Will mankind one day, without the net expenditure of energy, be able to restore the sun to its full youthfulness even after it had died of old age? Or more simply, it could be put like this. How can the net end amount of entropy of the universe be massively decreased? I probably need more water soon. Multivac fell dead and silent. The slow flashing of the lights ceased. The distant sounds of clicking relays ended. Then, just as the frightened technicians felt they could hold their breath no longer, there was a sudden spring into life of the telepipe attached to the portion of Multivac. 5 words were printed. Insufficient data for a meaningful answer. No bit, no bet, whispered Lupov, and they left hurriedly. By next morning, the two, plagued with a throbbing head and cottony mouth, had forgotten the incident. Gerode, Girardine, and Girodette 1 and 2 watched the starry picture in the visible change as the passage through hyperspace was completed in its non-time lapse. At once, the even powdering of stars gave way to the predominance of a single bright shining disk, the size of a marble, centered on the viewing screen. That's X-23, said Gerard confidently. His thin hands clamped tightly behind his back, and his knuckles whitened. The little Girodettes, both girls, had experienced the hyperspace passage for the first time in their lives, and were self-conscious over the momentary sensation of inside-outness. They buried their giggles and chased one another wildly about their mother, screaming, We've reached X-23! We've reached X-23! We've— Quiet, children, said Geraldine sharply. Are you sure, Gerard? Well, what is there to be sure? Asked Gerard, glancing up at the bulge of featureless metal just under the ceiling. It ran the length of the room, disappearing through the wall at either end. It was as long as the ship. Gerard scarcely knew a thing about the thick rod of metal except that it was called a microvac, the one that asked the questions if one wished, that if one did not, it still had its task of guiding the ship to a pre-ordered destination, of feeding on energies from the various subgalactic power stations, of computing the equations for the hyperspatial jumps. Gerard and his family had only to wait and live in the comfortable residence quarters of the ship. Someone had once told Gerard that the AC at the end of microvac stood for automatic computer in ancient English, but he was on the edge of forgetting even that. Geraldine's eyes were moist as she watched the visp. I apologize, my speaking is not the best. I feel like I am getting quite tired. Where was I? Geraldine's eyes were moist as she watched the visiplate. I can't help it. I feel funny about leaving Earth. Why, for Pete's sake? Demanded Gerard. We had nothing there. We'll have everything on X-23. You won't be alone. You won't be a pioneer. There will be over 1 million people on the planet already. Good lord, our great-grandchildren will be looking for new worlds because X-23 will look overcrowded. Then, after a relative pause, I tell you, it's a lucky thing the computer worked out interstellar travel the way our race is growing. I know, said Geraldine miserably. Geraldette said promptly, our microvac is the best microvac in the world. I think so too, said Gerard, tossing her hair. It was a nice feeling to have a microvac of your own, and Gerard was glad he was part of his generation and no other. In his father's youth, the only computers that had tremendous machines taking up 100 square miles of land. There was only one to a planet. Planetary ACs, they were called. They had been growing in size steadily for 1,000 years, and then all at once came a refinement. In place of transistors had come molecular valves, so that even the largest planetary AC could be put into space only half the volume of a spaceship. Gerard felt uplifted, as he always did when he thought that he had his own personal microvac, was many more times complicated than the ancient and primitive multivac that had first tamed the sun, and almost as complicated as Earth's planetary AC, the largest, that had first solved the problem of hyperspatial travel and had made trips to stars possible. So many stars, so many planets, sighed Geraldine, busy with her own thoughts. I suppose families will be going out to new planets forever, the way we are now. Not forever, said Gerard with a smile. It'll all stop someday, but not for billions of years. Many billions. Even the stars run down, you know. Entropy must increase. What's entropy, Daddy? Shrilled Geraldite too. Entropy, little sweet, is just a word which means the amount of running down in the universe. Everything runs down. You know, like your little walkie-talkie robot, remember? Can't you just put in a new power unit, like with my robot? The stars are the power units, dear. Once they're gone, there are no more power units. Geraldite one at once set up a howl. Don't let them, Daddy. Don't let the stars run down. Now look what you've done, whispered Geraldine, exasperated. How was I to know what would frighten them? Gerard whispered back. Ask the microvac, wailed Geraldite one. Ask him how to turn the stars on again. Go on, said Geraldine. It will quiet them down. Geraldite too was beginning to cry also. Gerard shrugged. Now, honeys, I'll ask Microvac. Don't worry, he'll tell us. He asked Microvac, added quickly, print the answer. Gerard cupped the strip of thin cellophane and said cheerfully, See now, the Microvac says it will take care of everything when the time comes, so don't worry. Geraldine said, And now, children, it's time for bed. We'll be in our new home soon. Gerard read the words of the cellophane again before destroying it. Insufficient data for meaningful answer. He shrugged and looked at the visiplate. X-23 was just ahead. VJ-23X of Lambeth stared into the black depths of the three-dimensional, small-scale map of the galaxy and said, Are we ridiculous? I wonder I'm being so concerned about the matter. MQ-17J of Nikron shook his head. I think not. You know the galaxy will be filled in 5 years at the present rate of expansion. Both seemed in their early 20s. Both were tall and perfectly formed. Still, said VG-23X, I hesitate to submit a pessimistic report to the Galactic Council. I wouldn't consider any other kind of report. Stir them up a bit. We've got to stir them up. VJ-23X sighed. Space is infinite. 100 billion galaxies are there for the taking. More. Excuse me, apologies. 100 billion is not infinite, and it's getting less infinite all the time. Consider, 20,000 years ago, mankind first solved the problem of utilizing stellar energy, and a few centuries later, interstellar travel became possible. It took mankind 1,000,000 years to fill one small world, and then only 15,000 years to fill the rest of the galaxy. Now the population doubles every 10 years. VJ-23 interrupted. We can thank immortality for that. Very well, immortality exists, and we have to take it into account. I admit it has its seamy side, this immortality, The galactic AC has solved many problems for us, but in solving the problems of preventing old age and death, it has undone all its other solutions. Yet you wouldn't want to abandon life, I suppose. Not at all, snapped MQ-17J, softening it at once to, not yet. I'm by no means old enough. How old are you? 223. And you? I'm still under 200, but to get back to my point, population doubles every 10 years. Once this galaxy is filled, we'll have filled another in 10 years. Another 10 years will have filled 2 more. Another decade, 4 more. In 100 years, we'll have filled thousands of galaxies. In 1,000 years, 1,000,000 galaxies. In 10,000 years, the entire known universe. Then what? VJ23X said, as a side issue, there's a problem of transportation. I wonder how many sun power units it will take to move galaxies of individuals from one galaxy to the next. A very good point. Already mankind consumes 2 sun power units per year. Most of it's wasted. After all, our own galaxy alone pours out 1,000 sun power units a year, and we only use 2 of those. Granted, but even with 100% efficiency, we only stave off the end. Our energy requirements are going up in geometric progression even faster than our progression. We'll run out of energy even sooner than we run out of galaxies. A good point. A very good point. We'll just have to build new stars out of interstellar gas. Or out of displaced heat, asked MQ-17J sarcastically. There may be some way to reverse entropy. We ought to ask galactic AC. VJ23X was not really serious, but MQ-17J pulled out his AC contact from his pocket and placed it on the table before him. I've half a mind to, he said. It's something the human race will have to face someday. He stared somberly at his small AC contact. It was only 2 inches cubed and nothing in it itself, but it was connected through hyperspace with the great galactic AC that served all mankind. Hyperspace considered, it was an integral part of the galactic AC. MQ-17J paused to wonder if someday in his immortal life he would get to see the galactic AC. It was a little off-world, in its little area of its own. A spiderwebbing of force beams holding the matter within its surge of submesons took the place of old clumsy molecular valves. Yet despite its sub-etheric workings, the galactic AC was known to be a full 1,000 feet across. MQ-17J asked suddenly on his AC contact, can entropy ever be reversed? VJ23X looked startled and said at once, oh, say I didn't really mean to have you ask that. Why not? We both know entropy can't be reversed. You can't turn smoke and ash back into a tree. Do you have trees on your world? Asked MQ-17J. The sounds of the galactic AC startled them into a silence. Its voice came thin and beautiful out of its small AC contact on the desk. It said, there is insufficient data for a meaningful answer. VJ23X said, see? The 2 men thereupon returned to the question of the report they were to make to the Galactic Council. Z Prime's mind spanned the new galaxy with a faint interest in the countless twists of stars that powered it. That powdered it. He had never seen this one before. Would he ever see them all? So many of them, each with its load of humanity, but a load that was almost a dead weight. More and more, the real essence of men was to be found out here, in space. Minds, not bodies. The immortal bodies remained back on the planets, in suspension over the eons. Sometimes they roused for material activity, but that was growing rarer. Few new individuals were coming into existence to join the incredible mighty throng, but what the matter? There was little room in the universe for new individuals. Z Prime was roused out of his reverie upon coming across the wispy tendrils of another mind. I am Z Prime, said Z Prime. And you? I am D sub 1. Your galaxy? We call it only the galaxy. And you? We call it all the same. All men call their galaxy, and nothing more. Why not? True, since all galaxies are the same. Not all galaxies. On one particular galaxy, the race of man must have originated. That makes it different. Z Prime says, on which one? I cannot say. The Universal AC would know. Shall we ask him? I am suddenly curious. Z Prime's sorry. Oh, fuck me, I really am tired. Z Prime's perceptions broadened until the galaxies themselves shrank and became a new, more diffuse powdering on a much larger background. So many hundreds of billions of them, all with their immortal beings, all carried their load of intelligences with different minds that drifted freely through space. And yet, one of them was unique among them all in being the original galaxy. One of them had, in its vague and distant past, a period when it was the only galaxy populated by man. Z Prime was consumed with curiosity to see this galaxy, and he called out, Universal AC, on which galaxy did mankind originate? The Universal AC heard, for on every world and throughout space it had its receptors ready, and each receptor led through hyperspace to some unknown point where the Universal AC kept itself aloof. Z Prime knew only of one man whose thoughts had penetrated within sensing distance of Universal AC, and he reported only a shining globe, 2 feet across, difficult to see. But how can that be all of Universal AC? Z Prime had asked. Most of it, had been the answer, is in hyperspace. In what form it is, I cannot imagine. Nor could anyone. For the day had long since passed, Z Prime knew, when any man had any part of the making of the Universal AC. Each Universal AC designed and constructed its successor. Each during its existence of 1,000,000 years or more accumulated the necessary data to build a better and more intricate, more capable successor in which its own store of data and individuality would be submerged. The Universal AC interrupted Z Prime's wandering thoughts, not with words, but with guidance. Z Prime's mentality was guided into the dim seas of galaxies, and in one particularly enlarged into stars. A thought came, infinitely distant, but infinitely clear. This is the original galaxy of man. But it was the same after all, the same as any other, and Lee Prime stifled his disappointment. D Sub 1, whose mind had accompanied the others, said suddenly, and is one of these stars the original star of man? The Universal AC said, man's original star has gone nova. It is a white dwarf. Did the men upon it die? Asked Lee Prime, startled and without thinking. The Universal AC said, a new world, as in such cases was constructed for their physical bodies in time. Yes, of course, said Z Prime, but a sense of loss overwhelmed him even so. His mind released its hold on the original galaxy of man, let it spring back and lose itself among the blurred pinpoints. He never wanted to see it again. D Sub 1 asked, what is wrong? The stars are dying. The original star is dead. They must all die. Why not? But when all our energy is gone, our bodies will finally die, and you and I with them. It will take billions of years. I do not wish it to happen even after billions of years, Universal AC. How may stars be kept from dying? D Sub 1 said in amusement, you're asking how entropy must be reversed in direction. And the Universal AC answered, there is as yet insufficient data for a meaningful answer. Z Prime's thoughts fled back to his own galaxy. He gave no further thought to D Sub 1, whose body might be waiting on a galaxy 1 trillion light years away, or on a star next to Z Prime's own. It didn't matter. Unhappily, Z Prime began collecting interstellar hydrogen out of which to build a small star of his own. If the stars must someday die, at least some could yet be built. Man considered with himself, for a way. Man, mentally, was one. He consisted of 1 trillion Trillion ageless bodies, each in its place, each resting quiet and incorruptible, each cared for by a perfect automation, each equally incorruptible, while the minds of all the bodies freely melted one into the other, indistinguishable. Man said, "The universe is dying." Man looked about the dimming galaxies. The giant stars, spendthrifts were gone long ago, back in the dimmest of dim far past. Almost all stars were white dwarfs, fading to the end. New stars had been built of the dust between the stars, some by natural processes, some by man himself, and those were going too. White dwarfs might yet be crashed together and all of the mighty forces so released, new stars built, but only one star for every 1,000 white dwarfs destroyed, and those would come to an end soon. Man said, "Carefully husbanded, as directed by the cosmic AC, the energy that is even yet left in all the universe will last for billions of years." "But even so," said man, "eventually it will all come to an end. However, it may be husbanded. However, stretched out, the entropy once expanded is gone and cannot be restored. Entropy must increase forever to the maximum." Man said, "Can entropy not be reversed? Let us ask the cosmic AC." The cosmic AC surrounded them, but not in space. Not a fragment of it was in space. It was in hyperspace, and made of something that was neither matter nor energy. The question of its size and nature no longer had meaning in any terms that man could comprehend. "Cosmic AC," said man, "how may entropy be reversed?" The cosmic AC said, "There is yet insufficient data for a meaningful answer." The man said, "Collect additional data." The cosmic AC said, "I will do so. I have been doing so for 100 billion years. My predecessors and I have been asked this question many times. All the data I have remains insufficient." "Will there come a time," said man, "when data will be sufficient, or is a problem insoluble in all conceivable circumstances?" The cosmic AC said, "No problem is insoluble in all conceivable circumstances." Man said, "When will you have enough data to answer the question?" The cosmic AC said, "There is as yet insufficient data for a meaningful answer." "Will you keep working on it?" asked man. The cosmic AC said, "I will." Man said, "We shall wait." The stars and galaxies died and snuffed out, and space grew black after 10 trillion years of running down. One by one, man fused with AC, each physical body losing its mental identity in a manner that was somehow not a loss, but a gain. Man's last mind paused before fusion, looking over a space that included nothing but the dregs of one last dark star and nothing besides but incredibly thin matter, agitated randomly by the tag ends of heat wearing out, asymmetrically, to absolute zero. Man said, "AC, is this the end? Can this chaos not be reversed into the universe once more? Can that not be done?" AC said, "There is as yet insufficient data for a meaningful answer." Man's last mind fused and only AC existed, and that in hyperspace. Matter and energy had ended, and with it space and time. Even AC existed only for the sake of the one last question that it had never answered from the time a half-drunken computer technician 10 trillion years before had asked the question of a computer that was 2 for AC far less than was a man to man. All other questions had been answered, and until this last question was answered also, AC might not release his consciousness. All collected data had come to a final end. Nothing was left to be collected. But all collected data had yet to be completely correlated and put together in all possible relationships. A timeless interval was spent doing all that. It came to pass that AC learned how to reverse the direction of entropy, but there was now no man to whom AC might give the answer of the last question. No matter, the answer, by demonstration, would take care of that too. For another timeless interval, AC thought how best to do this. Carefully, AC organized the program. The consciousness of AC encompassed all of what had once been a universe and brooded over what was now chaos. Step by step, it must be done. And AC said, "Let there be light." And there was light. The end. Well then, I must say I quite enjoyed that story. That was very, very well written. I can see why this was so highly recommended. The last question, I really enjoyed that. I would definitely be recommending that to others. There's a bit of a foreword here that I didn't read earlier because I wanted to get straight into the story, but I think it's appropriate that I read this. Isaac Asimov was the most prolific science fiction author of all time. In 50 years, he averaged a new magazine article, short story, or book every 2 weeks, and most of that on a manual typewriter. Asimov thought that The Last Question, first copyrighted in 1956, was his best short story ever. Even if you do not have the background in science to be familiar with all the concepts presented here, the ending packs more impact than any other book that I've read. I have to say, it's definitely very impactful. It was very well done. There's a little entry here by the author himself. This is by far my favorite story of all time that I have written. After all, I undertook to tell several trillion years of human history in the space of a short story, and I leave it to you as to how well I succeeded. I also undertook another task, but I won't tell you what that was lest I spoil the story for you. It is a curious fact that innumerable readers have asked me if I wrote this story. They seem never to remember the title of the story, or, for sure, the author, except for the vague thought that it might be me. But, of course, they never forget the story itself, especially the ending. The idea seems to drown out everything, and I'm satisfied that it should. Yeah, that was very well done. I really enjoyed it. The Last Question, I should definitely read more of his work. He is very talented, I must say. I should definitely read some more science fiction stories. There's plenty others that I really enjoy. How long did it take me to read that? No, about 30 minutes. Sounds about right. Now I have one more story I believe I have here. Ah, yes I do. This one's not very long, so I'll have this one be our last story for the night. Apologies if my voice was wavering a bit. Like I mentioned earlier, I am quite tired. And I think I have a little bit of work I should do after stream. Nothing intensive, just some refinement. I'm trying to make sure my audio settings are optimal. And I have some editing to do, which is something I don't really enjoy doing, I'm afraid, but it's useful that I do such matters. Also, I apologize if there was a little bit of whiplash between the two stories. One was more, not necessarily thriller or horror, just contemplative on human nature, while the second one, well, it's more science fiction, but oddly hopeful. I thought it would be a little bit more grim, but it was quite hopeful, which I'm pleasantly surprised with. Even more than pleasantly surprised. I definitely want to do more research on that. I really enjoyed that story, honestly. Just don't mind me, I'm just writing out the title of our last story for the night. I'm also going to need some more water, so please just give me 1 second. Yeah, unfortunately I can feel my throat starting to chafe. There we go. Gonna need a short. It's a longer title, so I have to make that a bit smaller, so I apologize. Let me just get another sip of water here. Blasted him out. I don't want to get up. Though I probably should. Alright then. I'll get more water. I'll be right back. Apologies for that. Sorry about that. I clicked the wrong scene briefly. Yeah, I had a little bit of an interesting interaction there, but no worries, no worries. Let me just, gonna have a little bit more of my pie here. And then we'll conclude with our last story of the night. There we go. Alright. Right then. Now let us begin our last story of the evening. This one is titled The Ones Who Walk Away from Omos. Omelas? Omelas. That's what I call it. Omelas. This is by Ursula. I am really fucking tired. Ursula K. Le Guin. Ah, fuck me. I am bad with names. This one might be a little more scuffed given how I am quite tired, but fuck it, we ball. With the clamor of bells that set the swallow... Ah, for fuck's sake. With the clamor of bells that set swallows soaring, the festival of summer came to the city. Omelas, bright towered by the sea, the swinging of boats in harbors, sparkled flags, in streets between houses with red roofs and painted walls, between old moss-grown gardens, and under avenues of trees, past great parks and public buildings, processions moved. Some were decorous, old people in long, stiff robes of mauve and gray, grave master workmen, quiet, Married women carrying their babies and chatting as they walked. In other streets, the music beat faster, a, simmer, a, s- a shimmering of gong and tambourine, and the people went dancing, the procession over the music and all the singing. All the processions wound towards the north side of the city, where on the great water meadow, on the great water meadow called the green fields, boys and girls, naked in bright air. Bloody hell, this PDF is not well formatted. Apologies in that. Yeah. Called the green field, boys and girls naked in the bright air with mud-stained feet and ankles and long lithe arms exercised their restive horses before the race. The horses wore no gear at all, but a halter without bit. Their manes were braided with streamers of silver, gold, and green. They flared their nostrils and pranced and boasted to one another. They were vastly excited, the horse being the only animal who has adopted our ceremonies as his own. Far off to the north and west of the mountains stood up half encircling Omelas on her bay. The air of morning was so clear that the snow was crowning the 18 peaks burned with white gold fire across the miles of sunlit air under the dark blue of the sky. There is just enough wind to make the banners that mark the racehorse snap and flutter now and then. In the silence of the broad green meadows, one can hear the music winding throughout the city streets, farther and nearer ever approaching. A cheerful faint sweetness of air from time to time trembled and gathered together and broke out into the great joyous clanging of bells. Joyous! How is one to tell about joy? How describe the citizens of Omelas? They were simple folk, you see. Though they were happy, we do not say the words of cheer much anymore. All smiles have become archaic. Given a description such as this one tends to make certain assumptions. Given a description such as this one tends to look next for the king, mounted on a splendid stallion and surrounded by noble knights, or perhaps a golden litter borne by great muscled slaves. But there was no king. They did not use swords, or keep slaves. They were not barbarians. I do not know the rules and laws of their society, but I suspect that they were a singular few. As they did without monarchy and slavery, so they also got on without the stock exchange, the advertisement, the secret police, and the bomb. Yet, I repeat that these were not simple folk, not dulcet shepherds, noble savages, bland utopians. They were not less complex than us. The trouble is that we have a bad habit, encouraged by pendants of sophisticates, of considering happiness as something rather stupid. Only pain is intellectual, only evil interesting. This is the treason of the artist, a refusal to admit the banality of evil and the terrible boredom of pain. If you can't lick 'em, join 'em. If it hurts, repeat it. But to praise despair is to condemn delight. To embrace violence is to lose hope of everything else. We have almost lost hold. We can no longer describe happy man, nor make any celebration of joy. How can I tell you about the people of Omelas? They were not naive and happy children, though their children were in fact happy. They were mature, intelligent, passionate adults whose lives were not wretched. Oh, miracle! But I wish I could describe it better. I wish I could convince you. Omelas sounds in my words like a city in a fairy tale. Long ago and far away, once upon a time. Perhaps it would be best if you imagined it as your own fancy bids, assuming it will rise to the occasion. For certainty, I cannot suit you. For instance, how about technology? I think that there would be no cars or helicopters in and above the streets. This follows from the fact that people of Omelas are happy people. Happiness is based on a just discrimination of what is necessary, what is neither necessary nor destructive, and what is destructive. In the middle category, however, that of the unnecessary but undestructive, that of comfort, luxury, exuberance, etc. They could perfectly well have central heating, subway trains, washing machines, all kinds of marvelous devices not yet invented here. Floating life sources, fuelless power, a cure for the common cold. Or they could have none of that. It doesn't matter. As you like it, I incline to think that the people from towns up and down the coast have been coming to Omelas during the last days of before the festival on very little fast trains and double-decker trams, and that the trams station in Omelas is actually the most handsome building in town, though the plainer than the magnificent farmers' market. But even granted trains, I fear that Omelas so far strikes some of you some of you as goody-goody. Smiles, bells, parades, horses, ugh. If so, please add an orgy. If an orgy would help, don't hesitate. Let us not, however, have temples from which issue beautiful nude priests and priestess already half in ecstasy and ready to copulate with any man or woman, lover or stranger, who desires union with the deep god hand of the blood, although that was my first ideal. But really, it would be better not to have any temples in Omelas, at least not managed temples. Religion, yes. Clergy, no. Surely the beautiful nudes can just wander about, offering themselves like divine soufflés to the hunger of the needy and the rapture of the flesh. Let them join the processions. Let tambourines be struck above the copulations, and the gory desires be proclaimed upon the gongs, and not an important point, let the offspring of these delightful rituals be beloved and looked after by all. One thing I know there is none of in Omelas is guilt. But what else should there be? I first had thought there were no drugs, but that is puritanical. For those who like it, the faint insistent sweetness of Druze may perfume the ways of the city. Druze, which first brings a great lightness and brilliance to the minds and limbs, and then after some hours of dreamy languor, and wonderful visions at last of the very arcane and inmost secrets of the universe, as well as exciting the pleasures of sex beyond all belief. And it is not habit-forming. For more modest taste, I think there ought to be beer. What else? What else belongs in this joyous city? The sense of victory? Surely. The celebration of courage? But, as we did without clergy, let us do without soldiers. The joy built upon successful slaughter is not the right kind of joy. It will not do. It is fearful, and it is trivial. A boundless and generous contentment, or contentment, a magnanimous triumph, felt not against some outer enemy, but in communion with the finest and fairest in the souls, and all men everywhere, and the splendor of the world's summer. That is what swells the hearts of the people of Omelas, and the victory they celebrate is that of life. I don't think that many of them would need to take Druze. Most of the processions has reached the green fields by now. A marvelous smell of cooking goes forth from the red and blue tents of the provisioners. The faces of small children are amiably sicky, and in the benign gray beard of a man and a couple of crumbs of rich pastry are entangled. The youths and girls have mounted their horses and are beginning to group around the starting line of the course. An old woman, small, fat, and laughing, is passing out flowers from a basket, and tall young men wear her flowers in their shining hair. A child of 9 or 10 sits at the edge of the crowd, alone, playing on a wooden flute. People pause to listen, and they smile, but they do not speak to him, for he never ceases playing and never sees them, his dark eyes wholly wrapped in the sweet thing magic of the tune. He finishes, and slowly lowers his hand holding the wooden flute. As if that little private silence were the signal, all at once a trumpet sounds from the pavilion near the starting line. Imperious, melancholy, piercing. The horses rear on their slender legs, and some of them neigh in the answer. Sober-faced, The young riders stroked their horses' necks and soothed them, whispering, "Quiet, quiet. There, my beauty, my hope." They began to form in rank along the starting line. The crowds along the racecourse are like a field of grass and flowers in the wind. The festival of summer, has begun. Do you believe? Do you accept the festival, the city, the joy? No? Then let me describe one more thing. In a basement, under one of the beautiful public buildings of Omeles, or perhaps in the cellar of one of its spacious private homes, there is a room. It has one locked door and no window. A little light seeps in dustily between cracks in the boards, second-hand from a cobwebbed window somewhere along the cellar. In one corner of the little room, a couple of mops with stiff-clotted, foul-smelling heads stand near a rusty bucket. The floor is dirt, a little damp to the touch, as cellar dirt usually is. The room is about 3 paces long and 2 wide, a mere broom closet or disused towel room. In the room, a child is sitting. It could be a boy or a girl. It looks about 6, but is actually nearly 10. It is feeble-minded. Perhaps it was born defective. Perhaps it has become imbecile through fear, malnutrition, and neglect. It picks its nose and occasionally fumbles vaguely with its toes or genitals, as it sits hunched in the corner, farthest from the bucket and 2 mops. It is afraid of the mops. It finds them horrible. It shuts its eyes, but it knows the mops are still standing there. And the door is locked. Nobody will come. The door is always locked, and nobody ever comes, except that sometimes the child has no understanding of time or interval. Sometimes the door rattles terribly and opens, and a person, or several people, are there. One of them may come in and kick the child to make sure it stands up. The others never come close, but peer in it with its frightened and disgusted eyes. The food bowl and the water jugs are hastily filled, the door is locked, and the eyes disappear. The people at the door never say anything, but the child, who has not always lived in a tool room, can remember sunlight, and its mother's voice, sometimes speaks. "I will be good," it says. "Please let me out. I will be good." They never answered. The child used to scream for help at night, and cry a good deal, but now it only makes a kind of whined, "eh eh," and it speaks less and less often. It is so thin that there are no clouts to its legs, its belly protrudes. It lives on a half bowl of cornmeal and grease a day. It is naked. Its buttocks and thighs are a mass of festered sores as it sits in its own excrement continually. They all know it is there. All the people of Omeles. Some of them have come to see it. Others are content merely to know it is there. They all know that it has to be there. Some of them understand why, and some do not. But they all understand that their happiness, the beauty of their city, their tenderness of their friendships, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skills of their makers, even in the abundance of their harvest and the kindly weathers of their skies, depend wholly on the child's abominable misery. This is usually explained to children when they are between 8 and 12, whenever they seem capable of understanding, and most of those who come to see the child are young people. Though often enough an adult comes back to see the child. No matter how well the matter has been explained to them, these young spectators are always shocked and sickened at the sight. They feel disgust, which they had thought themselves superior to. They feel anger, outrage, impotence, despite all of the explanations. They would like to do something for the child, but there is nothing they can do. If the child were brought up into the sunlight out of that vile place, if it were cleaned and fed and comforted, that would be a good thing, indeed. But if it were done, in that day and hour, all of the prosperity and beauty and delight of Omelas would wither and be destroyed. Those are the terms. To exchange all the goodness and grace every life in the Omelas for that single small improvement, to throw away all the happiness of thousands for the chance of happiness of one. That would be to let guilt within the walls indeed. These terms are strict and absolute. They may not even be kind words spoken to this child. Often the young people go home in tears, or in a tearless rage when they have seen the child and faced this terrible paradox. They brood over it for weeks or years. But as time goes on, they begin to realize that even if the child could be released, it would not get much good of its freedom. A little vague, pleasant warmth of food and of warmth, but no real doubt. No real doubt, but little more. It is too degraded and imbecile to know any real joy. It has been afraid too long to ever be free of fear. Its habits are too uncouth for it to respond to humane treatment. Indeed, after so long, it would probably be wretched without its walls to protect it, and darkness for its eyes, and its own excrement to sit in. Their tears that the bitter injustice dry when they came to see the terrible justice of reality, and to accept it. Yet, it is their tears and angers, the trying of their generosity, and the acceptance of their helplessness, which are perhaps the true source of the splendor of their lives. Theirs is no vapid, irresponsible happiness. They know that they, like the child, are not free. They know compassion, in its existence of the child, their knowledge of its existence, that makes possibly the nobility of their architecture, the poignancy of their music, the profundity of their science. It is because of the child that they are so gentle with children. They know that if the wretched one were not there sniveling in the dark, the other one, the flute player, could make no joyful music as the young riders line up for the beauty of the race in the sunlight of that first summer morning. Now do you believe them? Are they not more credible? But there is one more thing to tell. This is quite incredible. At times, one of the adolescent girls or boys who go to see the child do not go home to weep or rage, does not, in fact, go home at all. Sometimes also a man or woman, much older, falls silent for a day or two, and then leaves home. These people go out into the street and walk down the street alone. They keep walking, and walk straight out of the city of Omelas, through the beautiful gates, and keep walking across the farmlands of Omelas. Each one goes alone, youth or girl, man or woman. Night falls, the traveler must pass down village streets between the houses with yellow lit windows, and on out into the darkness of the fields. Each alone they go west or north, towards the mountains. They go on. They leave Omelas. They walk ahead into the darkness, and they do not come back. The place they go towards is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is possible it does not exist. But they seem to know where they are going. Those who walk away from Omelas. Right, that was quite nice. I've actually read this story before. Well, not necessarily this one, but I am well aware of it. In some of my previous classes, this story has been discussed as a matter of ethics and as a matter of human nature in not always being able to accept utopias and understanding that there must be a catch of some kind, and human nature to wonder why paradise is seemingly unattainable, why there always has to be some kind of catch to these type of things. There's been plenty of video essays about literature and human nature and philosophy that have referenced this book as well. I'm afraid I just forgot the name of the book earlier, but it's good to reread. It's not necessarily a story per se, as more of a thought experiment, as more of a way to portray how certain concepts can be conveyed. I'm not sure if that's fully making sense, but it's good to read. Again, apologies if this wasn't as interesting as the other two, but I think it's a good thought experiment. Well, maybe not an experiment, just something nice to ponder over. I feel like we could all use that more in the modern age, just something to keep our minds busy, I think a lot of us are very much content with being able to consume outer content in order to keep our minds satiated. But I think it's good to take a while back and be reflective and come to our own conclusions, as it were. That's probably just me being pretentious again. But hey, I'm okay with being a little bit pretentious. It's better than being a sniveling idiot, I can tell you that. But I will be wrapping it up here. We've reached our time, and I'm afraid I need my own rest. It is nearly 2 a.m. for me, as you can see, so it's getting late for everyone else here as well. So this will be where I call it. So if anyone ever watches this VOD in the future, much appreciated. But I am afraid this is going to be Valley Song signing out. Have a damn good one, y'all, and take care. I'll see y'all when I see y'all. Be safe, everyone. See y'all later. Czelga!